pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Well, sir, treason season started early this year as a nuclear sub was hijacked by local man Homer Simpson.
Oh, my God! I told him that photo would come back to haunt him.
Could Homer Simpson be a communist? His father spoke out on his behalf.
My Homer is not a communist. He may be a liar, a pig, an idiot, a communist, but he is not a porn star. It's over there.
The Soviet Union will be pleased to offer amnesty to your wayward vassal.
The Soviet Union? I thought you guys broke up.
Yes, that's what we wanted you to think.
Must crush capitalism.
The pod bay doors are open. Welcome once again. I'm your host, Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com and also ArmchairOscars.com and OverthinkingOscar.wordpress.com. Sitting here with my comrade, the critic, dare I say legend, from TalkMovieToMe.com, Mr. Doug Heller. How the heck are you today, sir?
Taxes waiting, Jack. I wanted to use the quote. We're talking about Reds. Warren Beatty's 1981.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July. There's a great speech that Louise, played by Diane Keaton, makes to the Senate or House committee that she's testifying in front of in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
And they're asking her if she's a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to use her speech.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't find
it. Yeah. I went down the list trying to find movies about, the 4th of July in America and all of that stuff. And it just landed on Reds. Hey, it's about an American.
It is. It's about patriotism.
Yeah, it is. This is Warren Beatty's film. I'm just going to say straight up, I can't say much for Warren Beatty as a director. His films are always a mess. This is probably the least of a mess that I've seen.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you this: the movie's about John Reed, who was a writer in the teens, right around World War I. And he was most famous for his book 10 Days That Shook the World, about the October Revolution in Russia. And he was a socialist.
Yes.
And he believed
he was a communist.
Communist.
There's a difference between the two.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. All my life, all I hear from anybody, from people older than me, is I can't stand Warren Beatty, and I never really figured out why. But I will say this about Reds: only Warren Beatty could raise $40 million to make a movie about a guy who hated millionaires.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if this thought ever entered his mind, but
yeah, if anybody, I mean, this is the man that got Bonnie and Clyde made.
Yes.
If you can get Bonnie and Clyde made, you're going to be able to get most things made.
Right.
And he got Bonnie and Clyde and Reds made.
Yeah. This was his baby. This was his pet project.
Oh yeah, for many years.
And it's kind of gotten lost.
Yeah.
The year that this came out, he won the Oscar for Best Director for this, and the movie kind of got lost. I know that in the at the Academy Awards that year, its chief competition, and this will tell you how bad a year 1981 was. Its chief competition at the Oscars was Raiders of the Lost Ark, which everybody expected it to be Reds or Raiders. but it ended up being Chariots of Fire,
Chariots of Fire, yeah.
which is a good movie.
It's not a bad movie. I don't know that I would have chosen it to beat Reds or Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right.
But Chariots of Fire is a very good movie.
And it was kind of the dark horse, and it just kind of came out of left field.
Yeah.
And it ended up winning. I'm one of the few people that actually really likes Chariots of Fire.
I like Chariots of Fire. I need to rewatch it. I've seen it maybe twice. Maybe
We should do a
twice.
show on that one.
It's a good movie.
It's a good movie.
It is a good movie.
The other two, of course, being Atlantic City, and which is
That's
every bit of a
dynamite movie.
it's every bit of a Louis Malle movie.
Yes, it is.
And then On Golden Pond, which I have come to appreciate only recently.
I like On Golden Pond. I don't love On Golden Pond.
Watch it again.
Watch
it again.
I group On Golden Pond in the same boat as Trip to Bountiful. They're probably great plays, but on film,
Probably will mean more to you as you get older. I've seen, getting back to Reds, I had only seen Reds once.
me too.
I liked it, but it meant more to me this time.
See, the same thing happened to me. I saw it many years ago, and I remember then not particularly paying a whole lot of attention to it, which is disastrous because if you miss 2 lines of dialogue,
it does require your attention.
It's 195 minutes, and if you miss one of them, you're going to have a hard time figuring out where you are.
Yeah, let me tell you something. The editing in this movie is a mess.
Oh.
There are scenes, I'm not kidding, there are scenes where someone is talking and the scene just ends. The scene just cuts to something else.
Yeah, or the way that I love the way that he structured it, making it like a pseudo documentary or
now that I really liked.
But it was very confusing when it first started, and you see Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton on the screen at certain points, but other people are talking, and you didn't see them to set up that they were talking.
Yeah.
Like, other people were talking, and then it cuts to them, and you think you're getting back into the movie. Like, commercial breaks over. And then the guy keeps talking over them. It's like...
Yeah.
It's jarring. It takes a second to readjust.
But I like the witnesses.
Oh, I love
it.
I love the way he put it together.
I like the witnesses because they're all people that knew the real John Reed.
Right, yes.
And what's interesting is when you go back and you start putting it together in your mind, what they were talking about. They're talking about the time period, they're talking about the politics, and they're talking about the John Reed that they knew. And when you get to the end of the movie, you get the feeling it's sort of a Citizen Kane style witness in that they knew pieces and they knew parts and they knew elements about John Reed, but none of the witnesses ever really knew him.
Together, with all of them together, you get a reasonably good portrait of who he was.
Yeah. The movie does keep him at arm's length, and I like that. The first half of the movie really is front-loaded with Louise Bryant.
Yeah.
The second half is really his story. But still, we never really get to know him.
Well, I mean...
And that's because nobody ever really did.
Yeah, I mean, for good reason. First of all, as left-wing as Warren Beatty has always been, I don't think he's ever really been a socialist or a communist.
He's a limousine liberal.
Well, yeah. So he, I don't think, wants the audience to sympathize with his side. He's telling a story about a good subject, right? And he's not interested in pushing the Bolshevik ideals, the mantras out on people. He just wants you to know this man lived and what he did and why he should be remembered.
Mm.
You know,
For something more than just 10 Days That Shook the World, because that's
right.
primarily what he's known for.
Mm-hmm.
This is thought of as a very Marxist, a film about a Marxist, but in truth, it's really about the American labor unions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I mean, he's remembered for the Bolshevik uprising, for 10 Days That Shook the World, but the movie is not really about that.
No.
Which is one of the things that I really would have, if I were sitting there with the writers, would have suggested. This movie, if you know the history of the American labor unions in the early part of the 20th century, this movie should have been soaked in blood.
Yeah.
There should have been a lot of bloodshed in this movie, because the history of American labor in this country is a very violent history.
labor strikes, union formations, and everything. The music of Woody Guthrie from the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
His labor songs. He wrote a bunch of songs about labor massacres.
Right.
It's a great song called 1913 Massacre. About bulls coming in and wiping out kids at a Christmas party, lighting fire where the miners were having a Christmas party, and they burned down the building, and like 30 kids were killed or something like that.
It's a bloody, it's a violent, bloody history.
It's not good.
They had in the old days, during the turn of the century, when so many immigrants were coming into America and they were going to work in factories and steel mills and things like that. They used to have what was called the coal and iron police, in which these were guys who would stand around, and if you looked like you were trying to start a union, they would start busting heads. And there were a lot of murders committed. And no one was reined in for this.
Well, there were a whole lot of protections for corporations and not any protections for workers.
Right.
I wonder if that ever changed.
Can't imagine.
I'm not thinking, I couldn't imagine living in a place where the corporations are more important than the people. It boggles my mind that something like that, or if a big national emergency health crisis or something happened, that we wouldn't put businesses ahead of people and rush back in to reopen while people were still dying at phenomenal rates, and that couldn't happen today. Thankfully, that couldn't happen today.
Thankfully, it could not happen today. Well, I tell you this. It helps you understand how communism happened, how communism really became the massive temptation for so many workers, because the idea of the working class having all the power, having all of the influence, was a great temptation when they were coming out and busting heads in favor of the corporations.
Yeah. I mean, the American worker, to a degree, especially at that point in history, the concept of socialism was very, very good.
Yeah.
For them.
The concept of communism was very good. Well, in this movie this movie illustrates it, because what they had the uprising for was not upheld.
No.
Because one of the things about this movie is that the reason that John Reed leaves the American Communist Party is because the bureaucrats took over.
Yeah.
And were not upholding the ideals, because they were not upholding the ideals of the October Revolution. And they were exploiting it.
Right.
And that's why he left.
Right. Well, this is this gets into, I mean, you see the building of this movement, you know, from the ground up.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
And I love that you see it through their eyes.
You do, and I love that. What? Now, this is going to sound like a weird thing for somebody to actually want more of, but I would have actually really been interested in the dynamic between the Leninites and the Trotskyites.
Yeah. You see it from a distance.
Barely mentioned. Trotsky
Yeah.
barely mentioned, and he was a much more important figure than a side note.
Now, I don't know if Trotsky's in the film. I know that...
I don't think he is. I think we only glimpse Lenin from afar. We don't even, he doesn't even get any lines.
Right.
So
I like that. I like that approach too.
I do too. I like that. Although Reed was considered important, he wasn't important enough to have to sit down with Lenin.
Right.
And we didn't have to sit through that meeting.
What's so great about it? One of the things I love about it is at the beginning. Our introduction to Reed is not direct. Our introduction to Reed comes through Louise Bryant.
Right.
We are filtered through her story, which is she was married to a dentist. And she had this burning desire to be independent, do what she wanted to do, live her own way. And he was not wanting to. He was absolutely against that because they're in an art gallery and someone has taken a nude photograph of her, and he can't deal with it, which is stupid.
Yeah,
because the picture's not really that bad anyway.
I love how everybody's it's blurry, and she's like, that was an artistic statement. Like nobody she was talking to were. Artists.
Even John Reed says that.
That's yeah, and like the concept of artistry versus aestheticism is also something that could have been elaborated on exponentially in a completely different movie that might actually be fun. But there's I feel so bad for her. Like all the way around. I feel sympathy for her too. Whenever, what do you do? I write, and then she's just ignored.
Yeah.
I felt like that. What do you do? Well, I'm a film critic. I write, and I'm writing. Oh, okay, that's cool.
Oh,
and
cool.
then nothing else.
Don't elaborate.
It's like, you don't understand this, so you don't want to engage. Okay.
Oh, what's your favorite movie? The Godfather. Oh, I never saw that.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah.
But she's and I encourage anybody who is interested in Diane Keaton to please see this movie because it will pull you out of thinking of her only in romantic comedies.
Yeah.
Because this is not La-Di-Da. This is not Annie Hall. Which she's marvelous in Annie Hall. She deserved her Oscar, but absolutely. I'm telling you, you watch this and you realize what a great actress she can be. And it's amazing because she has one of those personalities that you can see right through to the heart of this person. There's never any question about who she is. There's never any question about what she wants.
Right.
And there's never any question about how she feels.
She is probably the most together woman that you could possibly have imagined in a period piece like that.
And there's never a moment when you think, oh, she's this frail, delicate thing.
Oh, no.
You know, there's never that.
No.
Warren Beatty is so respectful of her.
See, the only reason people...
And they were dating at the time, that much might help.
The only reason people treaded very carefully, I think, around her was because of that. Like, they didn't want to go against her. They knew that she would take them down.
Yeah.
Like, she was she was quite a remarkable woman in and of herself. She stood on her own. She never minced her words. She stood up to everybody. Like what I was saying, the congressional testimony, which in Russia the women can vote. What about they're ahead of us here.
Yeah.
And you're telling me not to believe in this? Like why?
Yeah. It's she has very much the ideals of the suffragette of a suffragette. She
But
carries
more
those,
than that.
but more than that. That's what I was going to say. She's much more than just marching for it. She's trying to live it.
Yeah, she could genuinely be hailed as one of the first practicers of modern feminism.
Right.
Before Gloria Allred and all of that, the 70s feminist movement was everything she did. And they're like, oh, well, that's good.
Kind of the model of...
Right, because she was sexually progressive. She didn't... neither one of them really particularly believed in marriage until they decided to get married.
Diane Keaton's never been married.
That's true.
By choice. And I admire that. But it didn't... And it's funny that here it is... This is around World War I. The movie ends in 1920, and it's interesting that she's trying to do what she wants to do, live on her own, write the way she wants to write, and all through the 20th century, this kind of idea, this kind of independent woman would start and then sputter to a stall socially. And it would ramp up, it would happen, and then, when men went off to work in World War II, or when men went overseas in World War II, women went to work. When World War II ended and they came home, they went back home.
Yeah. And
then at the end of the 60s, with all the revolutions and everything going on, the independent, the women's movement started.
Right.
And it took a long time to get going. I mean, a long time.
Yes.
Because America still can't deal with women.
No.
On an equal footing.
And it refuses to.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, the wage gap isn't real. If the wage gap was real, wouldn't they just hire more women so they could save money? Apparently not.
Apparently not.
I actually had somebody tell me that the wage gap wasn't real because if it was, women would be employed more than men. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. They pay them less because they are deemed as less.
Let me tell you something. This is where it hit home for me. Okay. When my wife has her own business now, but when she was working for a corporation, early in her life, my wife is, or was before she had surgery, was a plus-size woman. And there were corporations that would not hire her because they deemed her an insurance risk.
Yeah.
But they didn't have that standard for men.
No.
How insane is that?
Well, I mean, and there's the pink tax.
Yeah.
That feminine hygiene products are marked up for no reason other than the fact that they are necessities. And that people have to buy them, so they charge whatever they want for them, which is awful.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, any kind of anything, health insurance. You have a pre-existing condition just by being born a woman. They just don't want to deal with you. Because Um, Traditionally, we adopted the concept that women were no better than cattle.
Right.
Women were property the same as animals. And
Breed mares.
Yeah, I've never understood that. Like, how can you say? I mean, it all goes into slavery. How do you own a person?
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it.
It's gone from owning a person to controlling a person.
Right, and the systematic.
And if you're a minority woman,
yeah.
particularly a single mother,
Yeah.
that's another rabbit hole to go down. I mean, this is just.
That would just lead us back to systemic racism, and we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And we will again.
Yeah. It'll come up on this show.
A lot.
But I see so much of what the 20th century will become in how she is treated.
Yeah.
One thing I do love, this I did not expect, and this I did not remember the first time I saw the movie. This is ostensibly a love story.
It is. It is.
The political stuff is kind of behind the love story.
Well, it's funny. It's in parts of it the love story is the secondary story, and in parts of it it's the primary story. It's the glue that's holding everything together, because we want to see how they get by with each other because of all the things that are happening to them externally.
It's a love story backed against the pages of history. And I mean, with a backdrop, I should say, with a backdrop of history.
It's akin to Dr. Zhivago, or even Lawrence of Arabia, or
a little bit of Titanic,
or it's these real life situations that have these complicated situations that. The way to get into it is to have something universally understood, which is a love story. Now, it just so happens that these two probably would not have been able to do what they did without each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, telling John Reed's story is the same as telling Louise's story, and vice versa. You couldn't tell one without the other. Intrinsically linked.
One thing that I liked about it is the fact that there's never a moment when you feel like she has to be with him because she's a woman.
Oh, yeah, no.
The great thing about this union is you sense that she loves him.
Mm-hmm.
She loves this person, this man, deeply and honestly. She loves him for the way he is. She loves him for his honesty. She loves him
for the way he isn't, too.
She loves him for the way he isn't, because he's willing to let her be, and he respects her work.
In the name, he works very hard to live the ideals that he's preaching.
Right.
And that, more than anything else, makes him a person worth studying. Because that's not common.
It's not common. And he's very good about being honest about her work. If you want to be taken seriously as a journalist, you have to write about serious things.
Right, or
he's very critical about her work.
You have to write consistently.
Right.
Like, you start a piece on this, and you don't finish it, and then you start working on this other thing that's on a completely different topic, and you're all over the place. She wasn't focusing.
Yeah.
But with him there, I'm sure her focusing on her stuff was difficult, to nigh on impossible.
Right.
It's actually impressive she didn't have a Zelda Fitzgerald breakdown.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't happen, obviously, for another 5 years or 10 years after the movie ended.
What I like is, and one of the things I love about this is the placement of these settings is really interesting, because I love the early scenes in Greenwich Village.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got all these intellectuals and they're sitting around, they're talking, and they're discussing ideas, and they're kind of battering ideas around, and she's struggling to fit into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem like she's a stranger in a strange land.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's never really been around these intellectuals who are willing to stop for 5 minutes and listen to her.
Right.
It reminded me of being in college.
Yeah.
And having these people sitting around with these kind of think tank ideas, and just kind of, as ridiculous as they can be, just throwing ideas around at each other and debating. I love that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that kind of world, which is, it reminds me of what happens every so often at the end of a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Because this time period, everybody seemed to believe they were living in times when the world was about to change. There was about to be a massive revolution. This happened at the end of the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And there was going to be a new world order. Everything was going to change.
Feels like it's happening now.
And follow me on this. Follow me on this. Because it happened at the end of the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
with the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And everybody believes there's going to be a new world order. There's going to be something new and different on the horizon, which scares traditionalists to death.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening now. And we always call it an apocalypse.
Only because it's the end. To bring in REM for a moment, it's the end of the world as we know it.
Mm-hmm. And
that is
some people don't like that.
Yeah, well, not everybody.
Some people don't like that. Some people believe that if you change is the worst thing that could happen. And that's not true.
Well, obviously.
Change is a good thing.
Change is the worst thing that can happen to people who are privileged and in power, because that just means that things are being equalized and they're no longer in a position of power.
Or it's some kind of change that's going to take away your ability. It's going to rob you of your ability to think the way that you have always thought.
It takes away your privilege.
Your privilege. The idea. One thing I love is, we were just coming off of Pride Month. One thing I love is the religious right, who's always complaining about, well, they're giving rights to gay people, so that means they're taking away my religious rights. Well, basically what it says underneath it is, it takes away your religious right. It takes away your right to be an intolerant fuckbag to people you don't like.
Yeah, pretty much.
The same thing with the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
It takes away your ability to be able to be shitty to people that are of a different race.
Right. Outlawing violence to just recently now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say just recently, we're recording this at the beginning of June 2020.
Yeah.
Just near the end of last year, before impeachment,
mm-hmm.
the House of Representatives passed a bill, the first bill ever, that would criminalize lynching.
Mm-hmm. 2020.
Yeah. Rand Paul blocked it in the Senate. It won't go forward.
Right.
Because apparently Rand Paul wants to lynch people and wants it to be legal. Because why else would you say, you know what, let's not make a law saying lynching is illegal?
Mm-hmm. What reason could you possibly have?
I'll bet his reasoning for it is, so he's a libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
Which means he doesn't want any governmental intrusion into anything. So making a law that tells people that they can't act in a certain way weirdly goes against his... Basically, he's saying that you're taking away people's rights.
Mm-hmm. Rights to
but
do
the
what?
right to murder, which is illegal,
Yeah.
based on a racial situation, which is a hate crime, which is also illegal.
Right.
So basically, he's just saying, "Well, I don't want my constituents to be arrested for doing something that they like doing."
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
he's a racist, so there's that too.
I want to be able to put a sign. I want you to be able to put a sign on your wall that says, "We don't serve this person, this person, this person, or this person,"
So that we know not to go there.
so we know not to go there. I mean, wow.
Mm-hmm.
2020.
Yeah.
There's a
is
lynching
still
law on the
technically
books.
not.
I mean,
there is not a lynching law on the books.
Well, not a
That's
lynching
the
law on the
problem.
books.
And it's being held up by the junior senator from Kentucky.
Right.
Does that make the South look any better? No, it does not.
No.
Oh, some hick cracker that claims he's a doctor yet still doesn't understand how viruses work
Right.
because he infected like half of the Republican caucus with COVID-19 because he was waiting on a test and just went around everywhere, touching everybody, touching everything, no concept, and he's supposed to be a doctor.
Right.
I mean, he's an optometrist, but ugh, sorry,
Yeah.
that was not about Reds, but
Technically, it is.
I guess so.
Because it is power to the people, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, the movie is about a revolution that was power to the people,
Mhm.
and taking down the bureaucrats who live off the blood and sweat of people, ordinary people who go to work, 8-9 hours a day,
At that
who
time, a lot longer.
bleed and suffer, and get nothing.
Yeah. At that
What?
point in history, it was 12, 14 hours a day.
Right. And you had no rights.
Right. It was
You
like
hadn't-
the Four Yorkshiremen sketch from Monty Python.
Yeah.
It's just four rich guys saying how little they came from.
Right.
It's like, well, we had to clean the whole house before we went to work at the mill. He's like, you had a house? We lived in a shoebox in the middle of the road. Had to lick the road clean every morning.
Yeah.
And pay mill owner for the privilege to work. And then Eric Idle at the end of it was like, right. I used to have to get up in the morning half an hour before I went to bed. Work
It's
29 hours at the mill and pay mill owner for privilege of working. And when I got home, our dad would slash us in two with a bread knife and dance about on our graves. Try to
Yeah,
tell
it's
the young
like-
people of today that, and they won't believe you. Nope.
There's a great moment on the early episode of The Simpsons when Homer gets a job working nights at the Quickie Mart,
Oh, yeah.
and he gets home from the Quickie Mart and he takes off his clothes and he gets into bed, and immediately the alarm goes off and he gets up and goes back to work. It's like that. It's like that's a perfect symbol. I mean, you work and work and work yourself to death for what?
Yeah.
For what? And it's to put
for the privilege of being poor and to make sure that your family is always downtrodden.
to live for the privilege of having the bills stack up so that your kids can never have an education and never do better
Kill
than
yourself
you.
to make enough money to not be able to pay anything.
To have a life that is not even a life.
Yeah.
And it's... This is what breeds revolution.
These are the people who are now called essential workers.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure.
And these are people...
The least of us are the most important, and that's still something that's not making it through to people.
And when it happened that people would try to start a union, try to start a revolution, try to start something to get something for themselves, it was called sedition.
Right. They would actually pass anti-union laws federally to prevent this stuff. Like, Congress has always been in the pockets of millionaires, of the 1%, whatever monetary designation that was at the time. A thousandaire, a millionaire, a billionaire, a soon-to-be trillionaire. Jeff Bezos is on track to be the first trillionaire in the world.
Yeah.
What the fuck is the reason for that?
What can you do with $21 million that you can't do with $20 million?
What can you not do with $5 million that you're going to be able to do with $1 trillion?
That's true.
Like, you don't need it. As a person, you don't need it. The only reason he has that is greed. And Bill Gates, I'm looking at you too. Y'all you say, oh, well, we put so much money into charity. Yes, but you are still worth hundreds of billions of dollars that could solve everything. If Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates gave away all but $1 billion of their money,
they'd still live comfortably.
They would still live comfortably. They would have no idea that they are going without anything, and the entire world would probably be fixed. Just those two people.
Have we indicated enough that we're on the left? I think we've sort of signaled that, but
listen, the only reason that I disagree with the politics in this is because I consider communism to be a watered-down bastardization of the idealism that is socialism. The Marxist ideal of socialism. Socialism is a utopian idea. It can't work. The way that Marx laid it out, it's impossible.
Communism, I'll just say this. It looked good on paper. The problem with it is it's not an idea. It's entirely theoretical. Because human beings cannot live by the system a system like that.
See, communism is the totalitarianization, and if that's not a word, it is now, of an ideal that basically said everybody works for everybody else, and if you're doing your job, the next person next to you can do their job, and you will have everything you need because they have everything they need.
Right.
Literally, it is just working for each other and leaving your greed out of it, and just working for humanity. That's basically what socialism is. Communism was, they took that idea of leveling the playing field for everyone, and did that for everybody except the ruling class.
Right.
So Marx had originally set this up as, you have a provisionary government that will transition you into the socialist marker, and then they will dissolve and become part of the people.
Right.
The communist idea was to never dissolve that ruling culture, that ruling class. So there was still then a capitalistic hierarchy within communism. There were still millionaires in Russia, oligarchs and everything, where there should not have been, if they were doing a true socialist government. So communism, because of its totalitarianism,
and they started feeding that. That's why he got upset with the Communist Party.
Exactly, and then it started to become like a darkness at noon situation. I don't know if you've ever read the Arthur Koestler book from 1952. Brilliant picture, a brilliant book that's never been made into a movie for no reason whatsoever, about a man who's imprisoned. He was one of the fathers of the revolution of this country that is never named, but the man was Russian, and he wrote in English for like 50 years because he got out. So it's obviously Russia, but this person is on death row for not being in lockstep with the party by still following the ideals of the original revolution. So the idea of it has changed so much that the original people are now thought to be traitors.
Right.
And that's exactly what was happening here.
Yeah, and the whole thing is it takes place during World War One, and John Reed's argument is, why are we in this war, sending kids into the meat grinder to fight for this cause that they don't even really understand?
Right. It was the industrial war complex before there was an industrial war complex.
And that element to World War One shocked everybody.
Yeah.
Because wars before that had been on horseback.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the romantic notion of war, riding in on horseback with the saber flashing in the sun, and you would vanquish the enemy. No, this was, they introduced the machine guns, tanks, all of these.
This was stand in a hole and be shot.
And the worst of all, things like poison gas.
Yeah.
This was an unbelievable bloodbath.
This was,
and
awesome.
this movie starts before Wilson took us into war, and I think it takes place begins between the time that he got reelected and the time that he actually took us to war, because he got reelected on the slogan, "He kept us out of war."
Right.
And
the I think 1916.
1917.
Well, the election was in 16.
Yeah.
And
he did it because the people wanted it.
Well, yeah. I mean, and
but that's not the only reason.
No, I mean, obviously there were a lot of corporate issues to take into consideration with World War One, and also, just we had the ability to stop this horrifying thing that was just going to drag on ad infinitum if there wasn't something that changed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, in a way, we helped the world by going, you know what, y'all aren't going to stop this, let's just finish this out.
But let's be honest. It's a little like going into a boxing ring, and America is the fresh fighter fighting an enemy that has just been through 6 other fighters. Mm-hmm. So the victory was kind of, they were kind of softened up by that. Look, by the time we got into the war, Germany was starving, England was broke, and Russia had gone home to start the revolution.
Yeah, Russia took their ball and went home.
Yeah.
France was basically just a big dirt pile.
France had lost 10 million people.
Yeah, and I mean, everything, it would have ended up just being a war of attrition. Like, who ran out of shit first? Mm-hmm. And
you can't imagine, young people, unless you really look at it. When Russia went home to start their revolution, which eventually led to the formation of the Soviet Union, kids, you cannot imagine the impact that revolution had on the rest of the 20th century. That it was a snowball effect for the rest of the century. It was unbelievable, really, because they built up what would eventually be the only other superpower in the world, mm-hmm. and a superpower that we were scared to death of, mm-hmm. for good reason. Mm-hmm. And we went to war. It's a shame
we're not still scared of it.
Yeah. Well, after World War II, we became their enemies.
Yeah.
The Korean War and the Vietnam War, both of them had to do with our tiff with Russia.
100%. I mean, it was to stop the spread of communism. It's like, you know what?
It wasn't really spreading. It was no. It was based on theoretical. It was based on theories.
Right, and
The domino theory? That's exactly what it was. It was a theory.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it was our intrusion into the area that made it easier for Mao Zedong to come to power and turn China communist.
Mm-hmm.
Which, China is the literal worst of communism. It's called market communism, which means it takes the very worst parts of communism and the very worst parts of capitalism and smooshes them together to get the worst possible thing you could ever imagine in an economic system. It's the worst idea ever.
China and Russia scared us.
Yeah.
But not as much as Cuba.
Well, because
and that's
that was
largely
right
because
there.
Cuba's right next door.
Right. And, you know, you put ICBMs on Cuba and you can hit Florida.
Right.
And, you know.
Almost happened.
Yeah. Which, you know, given what Florida evolved into.
Yeah. It's old people and serial killers.
And that's just in the tip. If you go up into the panhandle. Well,
not to knock people from Florida, but
it's rough country, man.
Well, honestly, and it's really interesting when you watch this movie to see John Reed and Louise Bryant get so swept up in this because it appears that the revolution is inevitable and it's happening, and they're in the middle of it. They're in Russia.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening.
A few times they go to Russia.
But I'm talking about that montage in the middle of the film. When they go to Russia, and there they are, they're swept up in these times, they're seeing the revolution happen. And I love the fact that they're so swept up in this, that what do? They have sex. Which is what people do when they see something like this happening, and it's happening the way they wanted it to.
Yeah.
And you know, there's these. It's a classic movie trope. It's like these lovers are in the middle of this, the middle of this time, and they're swept up in it. But the second half of the movie really is their disillusionment, because it doesn't really go the way that they thought it was going to go.
Everything falls apart because the old way of thinking is put onto this new model, and they try to make the new model conform with the old ways of doing things, and therefore they dilute it and basically take all of its teeth out.
Yeah.
And that's what politics does. It takes the thing that would probably be the most beneficial and rips all of its teeth out until you can only get gummed by it, and then they say, this is what we'll approve, this is what will pass, this is going to be the new law. Well, it doesn't do anything. Well, yeah, but this says exactly what you wanted it to.
He's trying to get. It's interesting in the this split that happens with the American Communist Party, because it's being run by bureaucrats. It's being run by. It's not conforming to the ideas. So he splits off from the American Communist Party and decides to form the American Communist Labor Party, which the Communist Party in Russia will not recognize. And that's one of the reasons he leaves, because he's trying to keep the purity of the ideas of the October Revolution. It's just not happening.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that he leaves. And it's just, it's heartbreaking, really.
It really is, and
because they were so elated by what was going on.
Right, and they were at the forefront of it. They were some of the crafters of that ideology in America. And then they're just basically taken out.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, wow.
And
This
then
is
he
a
writes-
radical revolution, but you're too radical for the radical revolution.
Right.
It's like, wait, what? No, wait, no.
But in the middle of this, that love story is so great because these are two people meeting not because they have to, but because they absolutely love each other.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, who couldn't fall in love with Diane Keaton?
I can't imagine not. But I love the fact that near the end, when she is trekking to try to find him, when Russia will not let him leave,
Right.
so you're too important. Now you have to stay.
Yeah.
She's trying to get to him, and he doesn't know. No one knows that she's taken off to try to get into Russia to find him.
Right.
That's commitment on a grand scale.
Yeah, no kidding.
She nearly died about 40 times trying to illegally cross into Russia.
That's why that last scene on the train platform is so earned.
Mm-hmm.
Because the train has been attacked.
Yeah.
And when it pulls into the station, the flags are in tatters, the train is in, the windows are broken, there are bullet holes all over the place. There are people being pulled off of the train on stretchers.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Bodies being pulled off.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's dead bodies being pulled off the train in stretchers. And you see, and of course, this is where this is where Beatty's filmmaking just falls into place, because you're looking at her, and nobody has a better expression. Nobody's a more expressive actor than Diane Keaton, because she's walking down the train,
mm-hmm.
and she's looking for him, and she stops at this car, and these men get off, one by one by one by one.
They're being applauded.
And they're being applauded, and she's waiting for him, and it doesn't happen.
She recognizes people. Like she knows one of them's a minister,
right?
It's a part of the ministry, or whatever.
And then the soldier gets off and closes the door,
right? And then she sees a body with the face covered on a stretcher, and assumes
under a red blanket.
Yeah, and assumes that it's him, but that turn.
Yeah, because you see him behind her,
right?
And she turns around, and boy, I mean, that's a moment.
Yeah.
And he says, "Don't leave me.
Yeah.
Please don't leave me." That is where I would have ended the movie. I think that would have been a perfect. I didn't need the scene after it.
With him in the hospital, yeah.
Yeah, because he died of tuberculosis, mm-hmm. and he had a kidney ailment. And there's a scene earlier where he goes to jail, and this man says, "Are y'all communists?" And goes over to the toilet and he says, "This one even pisses red."
Yep. Yeah.
And but John Reed died very young.
Mm-hmm.
He was only 32. And there's a scene in the hospital bed. She goes to get him water. She comes back and he's dead.
Yeah.
I didn't need that scene, because I think the impact of the film is in that scene right at the train station. Maybe a little card to tell us what happened. Something. It felt like a little too much.
Well, I see that, and on the other hand, and I agree with that. But on the other hand, I like watching old biopics because it was before they decided to just show 25 minutes of the person's life and then fill the rest in with note cards that take up another 35 minutes that could have been part of the movie but just weren't.
Yeah.
So, and this is to my mind one of the last great old school biopics that take mm-hmm. you from stem to stern of a person's life.
Right.
We don't go birth to death, but
it's not womb to tomb.
Right. It's not womb to tomb, but it is from the birth of the person that we're following. Like the birth of his identity to his death.
And that identity emerges slowly.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a very novelistic film. It's like The English Patient. Right. It goes in layers, and as it the farther you go along, it's not just things happening to pull you to a conclusion.
Yeah, it has a narrative structure that you would read in a book.
Right. This isn't a plot-based film. This isn't, this guy did these things and let's make sure that we get these things into the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was, he made it a movie about ideas and ideals. The way things were at the time, and parallels it. The man got this made on the dawn, at the dawn of Reaganism.
This is very strange to come on. Only Warren Beatty could have made it at this point in history.
It literally,
This came out in 1981, by the way.
Right, I don't know what...
It's Christmas Day.
Christmas Day?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so still less than a year into Reagan's first term.
Right.
As president.
Talk about the bureaucrats running things.
So let's recap his accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
He makes a movie that is 3 hours and 15 minutes long.
Yeah. 196 minutes.
About an American communist revolutionary, the only American buried at the Kremlin,
right,
for his efforts in leading the revolution. $21 million movie, which is astounding at that point. 1980.
And he raised $40 million to get it made.
Yeah. And gets it released all while things were going on a very right-wing way. The seeds were sown with Nixon, and people got... There was a placeholder with Ford, and then they curtailed everything Carter was trying to do.
Well, Jimmy Carter was trying to do things a very old-school way.
He was trying to get very new things done in a very old way, and he didn't have a Congress that was supportive of his agenda. If he'd have had a Congress supportive of his agenda, we would have a whole lot of different things right now.
But he was trying to deal with a part of the world that he thought he understood. Mm-hmm. He didn't understand as well as he thought he did.
He does now.
He does now. But at the time, he didn't really understand what was... I think he had a misunderstanding of what was going on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And it was a very rough situation. Yeah. Which the only good thing to come out of it was that there were no hostages killed. Mm-hmm. But that hostage crisis is what got Ronald Reagan elected.
Yeah.
And then we spent 8 years with him.
Yep.
And boy, talk about class.
The Contras and invading Grenada for no damn reason,
and the economic problems. I mean, yeah, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer.
Yep. The introduction of supply side economics, or as his vice president George H.W. Bush called it, voodoo economics, because the only way that it would work is through magic. Mm-hmm. And it has not worked, and it never has worked, and it never will work.
Cut and cut and cut on the budget.
Cut social programs that your workers and essential people need, just for the sake of getting more money into a person's pocket that wouldn't know if they didn't get that money or not.
Poorer neighborhoods became even poorer.
Keep on rocking in the free world.
And the poorer neighborhoods had to turn to things that were unhealthy. Crime, drugs. This is where crack came from.
Mm-hmm.
Crack came out of this economic disaster on their part. And
coupled with a disastrous war on drugs that was basically just
a pricing system.
It was a pricing system, and it was just a way for them to another way to put black people in jail.
Right.
For not any real reason.
And and the real screw you out of all of it was the fact that when you had all of these corporate billionaires who became billionaires, they broke the law and went to jail.
Yeah. Not enough of them.
Not enough of them, but they broke the law and went to jail, leaving millions and millions of ordinary people without their savings and without a means of support. You know, and it was just a disaster.
It was a bailout for the people.
And on top of that, there was a disease that was first discovered in his first term that he did nothing about.
Yeah.
Did not mention it until his second term was almost over.
Mm-hmm.
And millions of people died of AIDS because his government did nothing about it.
Yep.
And you tell me the government is working for the people.
Again,
you know, I mean,
it's just comforting to know that scale of health crisis, that we would never do anything like that, ignoring
never,
and not understanding its severity right away to save lives. I don't think that there's ever a situation where we will lose more people to a virus than we lost to in Vietnam War in only 3 or 4 months, 2 months.
Forgive us if you're listening to this 10 years from now. We're still in the middle of the COVID crisis.
With the police murder of George Floyd sparking racial protests and AstroTurf violent riots that are being caused by the people who are on the right that just want to make black people stay under the thumb. And, you know, look, I have a lot to say about this, and I almost regret that we already talked about Do the Right Thing, because now would be like a perfect time to do it. I'm still thinking about showing that to my son for the first time.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out when exactly we could talk about Reds, because I thought, well, we could talk about it at Christmas because it came out at Christmas, and I thought, well, we could talk about it at Valentine's Day. We could, you know, we could, because it's a big old love story. But then I thought, why not just stick it in the middle? Just stick it right here at the 4th of July. And it's really weird. You know what's really funny is I sat down the other day as I was kind of researching this. And right in the middle of it, you know how when you pull up a video on YouTube or Dailymotion or something, there'll be a big ad, a paid for ad, and it was for a truck, and it was one of those big kind of Reagan era style things where you've got the rancher on horseback and the thresher out in the field and the sun's coming up and all of that crap, and it's that's the greatest country in the world, you know. For those who work. Here, buy a truck, you know. We salute our workers, you know. It's morning in America again.
All right. I think that's all I have. Is that all you have?
It's a good movie.
It is a good movie.
It's a hell of a good movie. It's a lot better movie than I remember.
Yeah, it's a lot more engaging than it...
And very divisive. I know a lot of people that just don't like this movie.
Well, that's...
It is a mess.
As much to do with the subject matter as to do with Warren Beatty does not have the greatest reputation.
No, he doesn't, because everybody I talk to, I don't like Warren Beatty. But they can never tell you why.
Yeah. Like, this picture reminded me of kind of the big disaster that he never won an acting Oscar. I love his performance in this.
I do too. This is his best
I
performance.
love the way that he stumbles through his line to get to his point.
Yeah.
In a
Politics
very,
are kind of muddy.
Yeah, it's a very naturalistic way of a person trying to rebut. You know, he acts in a very natural way here, much like he does in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which I would probably put up as his other best performance.
Yeah.
And I've always just kind of loved... He's Warren Beatty in everything he does, but he also has a way of changing to fit in with the character. Like...
See, that's a problem. That's a DiCaprio thing. It's like you see DiCaprio, but unfortunately, no matter what he plays, he's always going to be DiCaprio.
Right. It was what pulled me out of Captain Phillips.
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks.
I don't know, but that scene at the very end, man, when he has his breakdown.
End, yes.
That's his moment.
Yeah, it's devastating, and it's an amazing moment for him as an actor, but the whole time I just couldn't.
You couldn't see Richard Phillips. You just kept seeing.
Right. So that's a thing, and for him, it's even more of a thing because as the years went on and his reputation as a ne'er-do-well grew, his output declined.
Right.
So he looked like he was just fading away into, just coming out whenever something he got something made, and he would be out there for a few minutes and then he would disappear again.
And you've heard his Oscar speech when he got the Thalberg.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of rambling.
Very rambling.
And it's really, I hate to say this, it's kind of what you expect from Warren Beatty.
Yeah.
And you can see it in his filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. He's a very scattershot man. When I read a book about the making of actually the 5 pictures that were nominated for the 1967 Best Picture, and Bonnie and Clyde was one of them. It talked
Which
about
were Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde, In the Heat of the Night, the other Sidney Poitier movie.
The Russians Are Coming.
No. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Dr. Dolittle.
Oh, God. The hell?
And The Graduate. So...
There was some money that changed hands there.
Oh, yeah. So, and it just kind of talked about how his producer's hand is very strong.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always make sense, but he always gets what he wants.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's a great movie. We've got some weird stuff coming up. This is a weird month for us.
What do we got next week?
Well, next week we're going down old Mexico way.
Mm-hmm. For a very Hollywood film. One Hollywood film to another.
John Huston's second masterpiece, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Pardon me. Could you help a poor American who's down on his luck?
Then we're doing E.T. for our annual Spielberg, and then we're doing The Searchers, because it's the only John Wayne movie that I really, really love. That about does it here for us. You can find all of our episodes at the podbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can find us on iTunes and YouTube. Go to Twitter and type in @pod_bay, and that will take you to our page. Copy and paste that handle over on Patreon, and that's where you'll find us there. We thank you so much for listening, and the Pod Bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.
I got handed an Ayn Rand sandwich straight from the can. It tasted so bland. I asked a lass to pass me a glass of Engels' Conditions of the Working Class. Right away they dragged me to the committee to explain my un-American activity. They're gonna see they made a mistake if they'd only let me play my mixtape. I'm not partial to the marshal or the plutocrats in their beaver hats, and the fascists have the outfits, but I don't care for the outfits. What I care about is music, and the communists have the music. I hear a melody, and just as suddenly I know who I'm supposed to be. I don't need a rationale to sing the International. I only need to plug in the headphone jack so I can listen to my backing track. I'm not jealous of the zealous or anarchics with guitar picks and a